People often say Marilyn Monroe was loved by the most powerful men in the world. Joe DiMaggio adored her. Arthur Miller married her. Presidents desired her. But here's the truth no one talks about. Marilyn Monroe was loved and still felt unsafe. Not occasionally, not in moments of conflict, but constantly. This video is not about who loved Marilyn Monroe. It's about why love never made her feel safe, and why every relationship, no matter how passionate, ended in fear, control, or abandonment. Because the most tragic part of Marilyn Monroe's life wasn't that men used her. It was that even the men who loved her couldn't make her feel protected. In the Cal Neva series, we saw what happened when Marilyn's fear finally overwhelmed her nervous system. In the last video, we explored the childhood trauma that wired her brain for danger long before Hollywood. Now we arrive at the most painful question. If Marilyn Monroe wanted safety more than fame, why did she never find it, even with men who truly loved her? Most people misunderstand safety. Safety is not passion, it's not desire, it's not attention or protection promises. Safety is something much quieter. Safety is what your nervous system feels when it believes nothing bad is about to happen. Marilyn Monroe never had that feeling, even when she was held, even when she was adored, even when she was married. Because safety is learned in childhood, and Marilyn never learned it. Her body didn't associate closeness with calm, it associated closeness with risk. Think about what that means in practical terms. When Joe DiMaggio reached for her hand across a restaurant table, Marilyn's body didn't relax into his touch. Her shoulders tightened. Her breathing became shallow. Not because she didn't love him, but because every touch in her childhood had been unpredictable. Sometimes it meant comfort. Sometimes it meant being moved to another foster home. Sometimes it meant worse things she never spoke about publicly. So her nervous system learned to stay alert, to never fully trust the moment, to wait for the other shoe to drop. This wasn't something Marilyn could think her way out of. You can't logic your way into feeling safe when your body learned danger before your mind learned words. Trauma lives in the body. It's stored in muscle memory, in breath patterns, in the way your heart rate spikes when someone raises their voice even slightly. Marilyn could tell herself Joe loved her. She could recite it like a mantra, but her body told a different story, and the body always wins that argument. Her therapist noted that Marilyn would sometimes freeze mid-sentence during their sessions. Her eyes would go distant, her hands would start trembling, her body had registered some invisible trigger, some reminder of danger, and pulled her out of the present moment entirely. That's what unresolved trauma does. It keeps you living in the past even when you're desperately trying to stay in the present. Joe DiMaggio loved Marilyn Monroe deeply. That is not disputed. He protected her from photographers. He defended her publicly. After her death, he sent roses to her grave for decades. And yet Marilyn was terrified in that marriage. Why? Because DiMaggio's love came with control. He wanted Marilyn to be quieter, more modest, less visible, less Marilyn. His jealousy wasn't malicious, but to someone with Marilyn's trauma history, jealousy feels like danger. There's a moment that captures this perfectly. When Marilyn filmed the famous subway grate scene for The 7-Year Itch, her white dress billowing up around her thighs, thousands of onlookers gathered to watch. Joe stood in the crowd, his jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. He didn't hit anyone. He didn't make a scene, but Marilyn saw his face. She saw the rage building behind his eyes. And that night, back at their hotel, he exploded. Not with violence necessarily, but with volume, with accusations, with the kind of anger that fills a room until there's no air left to breathe. For most people, that might have been an argument, a bad night, something you work through. But for Marilyn, it was a trigger. Raised voices triggered childhood fear. They brought her back to foster homes where adults screamed at each other while she hid under thin blankets, where anger meant someone was about to leave or someone was about to get hurt. Her body couldn't tell the difference between Joe's jealousy and the chaos of her childhood. Both felt like danger. Both meant she wasn't safe. Possessiveness felt like imprisonment. When Joe wanted to know where she was going, who she was seeing, what she was wearing, Marilyn didn't experience it as caring. She experienced it as control, as someone deciding what she was allowed to be. And control. To someone who spent their childhood being moved from home to home with no say in the matter, feels like suffocation. Friends who visited their San Francisco home described Marilyn moving quietly through the rooms, trying not to disturb Joe as he read his newspaper. She'd make his coffee exactly how he liked it. She'd ask before turning on the radio. She'd change clothes 3 times before going out, trying to find something that wouldn't trigger his disapproval. It was like watching Marilyn shrink, like she was trying to take up less space in her own life. Joe loved her, but his love activated her nervous system instead of calming it. So Marilyn did what traumatized people often do. She left the person who loved her because love still didn't feel safe. 9 months. That's how long the marriage lasted. 9 months of trying to make love feel like safety and failing every single day. On the morning she filed for divorce, Marilyn wore dark sunglasses to hide the fact that she'd been crying, but her hands were steady for the first time in months. Leaving Joe hurt, but staying was killing her. Being protected is not the same as feeling safe, and this is where most people misunderstand Marilyn completely. Arthur Miller offered Marilyn something no man had before: respect. He saw her mind. He took her seriously. He believed in her intelligence. For someone who'd been treated as nothing but a body for most of her adult life, that felt revolutionary. Miller didn't just want to sleep with her. He wanted to talk to her about books, about politics, about ideas that mattered. Marilyn fell in love with that version of herself, the one she saw reflected in Arthur's eyes. The serious woman, the intellectual, the artist. But safety requires more than admiration. Miller loved Marilyn's potential, but struggled with her emotional needs. When Marilyn became anxious, dependent, or fragile, he withdrew. There's a moment documented in Miller's own notes, discovered years after Marilyn's death, where he admits feeling disappointed in her. He'd built up this image of who she could become: the serious actress, the literary wife. But when Marilyn's anxiety spiked, when she couldn't sleep, when she needed reassurance at 3 in the morning, Miller didn't know what to do with that need. Silence replaced reassurance. Distance replaced comfort. And to Marilyn's nervous system, emotional withdrawal felt exactly like childhood abandonment. It felt like the social workers who stopped visiting, like the foster parents who grew tired of her and sent her back, like every adult who promised to stay and then disappeared without explanation. Miller didn't leave physically. He was there in the house, in the room, in the marriage, but emotionally he was gone. And emotional absence to someone with Marilyn's history is the same as being left. Miller didn't intend harm. He was a good man by most measures, brilliant, principled, committed to social justice. But intention doesn't matter to trauma. What matters is how the body interprets distance, and Marilyn's body interpreted distance as danger. It interpreted silence as the beginning of abandonment. It interpreted Miller's disappointment as confirmation of what she'd always suspected, that she was too much, too needy, too broken, not worth staying for. There were moments when Marilyn would stand in the doorway of Miller's study, watching him work, waiting for him to look up. Sometimes he would, sometimes he wouldn't, and on the days he didn't, Marilyn would retreat to the bedroom and take a pill, then another, not to get high, but to quiet the panic rising in her chest. The panic that said, "He's leaving. Everyone leaves. You're not enough to make anyone stay." During the filming of The Misfits, which Miller wrote specifically for Marilyn, their marriage reached its breaking point. On set, under the brutal Nevada heat, Marilyn was falling apart. She couldn't remember her lines. She showed up hours late. She retreated to her trailer and wouldn't come out. Miller watched from behind the cameras, his face a mask of frustration. What he couldn't see was that Marilyn was drowning. The pressure to be the actress he believed she could be was crushing her. Every forgotten line felt like proof that she was disappointing him. Every late arrival felt like confirmation that she was failing. And the more she failed, the more she needed pills to function. He loved her mind, but couldn't hold her fear. Marilyn didn't experience relationships as places to rest. She experienced them as tests. Am I too much? Am I not enough? How long before they leave? What do I have to become to stay loved? This is the psychology of anxious attachment, created not by weakness, but by repeated early loss. With Joe, she tried to be quieter, more domestic. She cooked. She stayed home. She wore less makeup, trying to be the private woman he wanted instead of the public icon the world demanded. But it never felt authentic. It felt like holding her breath, like being an actress in her own life. With Miller, she tried to be smarter, more serious. She read the books he recommended. She studied acting with Lee Strasberg, pushing herself to become the artist Miller believed she could be. She miscarried twice during their marriage, and each time she blamed herself, not just for losing the pregnancies, but for failing the test, for not giving Miller the family that might make her worthy of staying. The physical pain of those losses was real, but the emotional pain was worse, because each miscarriage felt like proof that she couldn't do the one thing that might make her lovable beyond her beauty. She couldn't even give him a child. After the second miscarriage, Marilyn spent 3 days in bed, not sleeping, just staring at the ceiling. Miller brought her soup that she didn't eat. He sat on the edge of the bed and tried to comfort her, but his words felt hollow. She could hear the disappointment underneath them. Not disappointment about the miscarriage itself, but disappointment in how she was handling it, in how she couldn't just grieve and move on, in how her sadness was so consuming that it left no room for anything else. Marilyn was constantly performing safety, smiling, agreeing, enduring, because her nervous system believed one thing: if I stop being what they want, I will be abandoned. Marilyn didn't confuse love with danger. She learned they arrived together. When Marilyn became involved with powerful men, something even more dangerous happened. Power erased safety completely. This isn't about specific names or unverified allegations. It's about understanding what power imbalance does to someone already wired for danger. These relationships, whether real or rumored, shared a common pattern: secrecy, excitement, validation, but never security. Powerful men are untouchable by design, protected by layers of security, staff, political machinery. When they want to see you, you come. When they don't, you wait. You have no way to reach them except through intermediaries. No way to know when you'll see them again. No way to predict when the attention will come or when it will vanish. Marilyn was not afraid of exposure. She was afraid of being disposable, of being erased, silenced, replaced. To someone whose childhood taught her that people disappear without warning, powerful men were terrifying. Because power means you don't get to say no. You don't get to demand transparency. You don't get to ask for commitment. You take what you're given and you're grateful for it. And when it's over, you disappear quietly. That's the unspoken rule. There's a story, never fully verified but repeated by enough people close to Marilyn to carry weight, about a phone call she made in her final weeks. She called a switchboard, asking to speak to someone important. The operator asked who was calling. Marilyn gave her name. There was a long pause. Then the operator said the person was unavailable. Could she take a message? Marilyn hung up. She sat on her bed in her Brentwood home, staring at the phone, realizing that she had no real access, that whatever had existed, whether it was romance or exploitation or something in between, she had no power in it. She couldn't even get a call returned. What made it worse was that these relationships existed in complete secrecy. Marilyn couldn't tell anyone about them, couldn't seek advice, couldn't even process what was happening because acknowledging it out loud would be dangerous. So she carried these relationships alone, in silence, with no one to help her make sense of the confusion and pain they caused. She'd go to events and see these men across the room, surrounded by their wives, their staff, their legitimate lives, and she'd stand on the periphery, wearing a smile, pretending she didn't exist to them in any meaningful way. The secrecy itself became a form of erasure. It told Marilyn that what they shared wasn't real enough to be acknowledged, that she wasn't important enough to be introduced, claimed, protected. She was a secret, and secrets by definition are things you hide because they have no value in the light. Power removes safety, regardless of who holds it. People often ask, why didn't Marilyn leave? Why didn't she refuse? Why didn't she protect herself? Because her nervous system believed saying no equals abandonment. That belief was formed long before fame, long before marriage, long before Cal Neva. Compliance kept her safe as a child, so compliance became survival as an adult. Even when it hurt her, in foster care, the children who complained got moved. The children who caused problems got sent back. Marilyn learned early that her survival depended on being easy, on not making waves, on saying yes, even when every part of her wanted to say no. That pattern doesn't just disappear because you become famous. If anything, fame reinforced it. Studio executives told her what to wear, how to speak, what roles to take. And when she tried to say no, they suspended her. They reminded her that there were 1,000 other blonde girls who would say yes without hesitation. So Marilyn learned to swallow her no, to smile through photo shoots that made her uncomfortable, to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, to agree to meetings and dinners and trips that she didn't want to take, because somewhere deep in her nervous system she believed that the moment she stopped complying, she'd be abandoned, replaced, forgotten. There's a heartbreaking moment in Sam Shaw's photographs from the 7-Year Itch set. Between takes, when the cameras weren't rolling, Shaw captured Marilyn's face in its natural state. No smile, no performance, just exhaustion. Her eyes look hollow. Her shoulders are slumped. She looks like someone who's been running for so long that she's forgotten what she's running from. Those photographs never made it into magazines. They weren't marketable, but they show the truth that Marilyn lived every day, that compliance is exhausting, that saying yes when you mean no slowly destroys you from the inside. She wasn't weak, she was trained to survive. Now Cal Neva makes sense, not as a mystery, not as a conspiracy, but as the final moment where Marilyn realized no man, no relationship, no protector had ever made her feel safe. Her body had reached the end of endurance. She'd spent 36 years trying to find safety in other people, in their love, in their desire, in their promises, and it had never worked. Not with Joe's protection, not with Arthur's respect, not with powerful men's validation. None of it had quieted the terror in her nervous system. None of it had made her feel like she could finally rest. At Cal Neva, in that lodge overlooking Lake Tahoe, surrounded by people who claimed to care about her, Marilyn was more alone than she'd ever been. Her body was there, but she wasn't. She'd disappeared into pills and alcohol, trying to chemically create what she'd never found emotionally. A sense of peace, a moment without fear, a feeling that she was safe enough to stop performing and just be. Witnesses from that weekend described Marilyn as barely present. She'd appear beautifully dressed, makeup perfect, and then vanish for hours. She'd be found sitting alone by the lake, staring at the water. She'd show up for dinner and leave her food untouched. It was like watching someone who'd already left but whose body hadn't gotten the message yet. What nobody understood at the time was that Marilyn wasn't being difficult. She wasn't being dramatic. She was shutting down. Her nervous system had finally reached the point where it couldn't pretend anymore, couldn't perform safety, couldn't smile through one more interaction. The survival mechanisms that had carried her through childhood, through Hollywood, through marriages and affairs and abandonment were failing. And without those mechanisms, Marilyn had no idea who she was or how to keep going. The tragedy of Marilyn Monroe's relationships isn't that she chose bad men, it's that she couldn't recognize good love even when it was offered. Because good love didn't feel familiar. Safe love felt wrong to her nervous system. It felt suspicious. It felt like a trap. This is what trauma does. It rewires your instincts. It makes danger feel like home and safety feel like danger. Joe's protection felt like control. Arthur's respect felt like distance. Powerful men's desire felt like validation. None of it was safety. But Marilyn didn't have a baseline for what safety actually felt like. So she kept searching in all the wrong places, with all the wrong people, in all the wrong ways, and every time a relationship ended, it confirmed what her childhood had taught her, that she was unlovable, that love was conditional, that no matter how hard she tried, she would always end up alone. This belief became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more she believed it, the more her anxiety pushed people away. The more people left, the more the belief was reinforced. It was a cycle with no exit. What makes this even more painful is that Marilyn was aware of the pattern. In her private journals, she wrote about feeling trapped in relationships that hurt her. She wrote about wanting to be different, to choose better, to break free. But awareness doesn't heal trauma. Understanding the pattern doesn't give you the power to change it. That requires safety, real safety, the kind Marilyn never had. Marilyn Monroe didn't need more love, she needed safety. And those are not the same thing. Love without safety is just another performance, another test, another opportunity to fail. What Marilyn needed was someone who could hold her fear without trying to fix it, someone who could stay present when she was anxious without withdrawing, someone who could see her falling apart and not make it about their own disappointment. She needed consistency, predictability, transparency, the opposite of every relationship she'd ever known. She needed someone to prove, day after day, through action, not words, that they weren't going anywhere, that her anxiety wouldn't drive them away, that her need wouldn't exhaust them, that she didn't have to perform to earn their presence. But that kind of healing relationship requires both people to be healthy enough to create it, and Marilyn never found that. Not because she wasn't worthy of it, but because trauma attracts trauma. Anxious attachment attracts avoidant attachment. The people who felt familiar to Marilyn were the people who would ultimately hurt her, and the people who might have been safe felt so unfamiliar that she couldn't trust them. This isn't a moral failing, it's a survival mechanism gone wrong. Marilyn's nervous system was trying to protect her the only way it knew how, by staying alert, by expecting abandonment, by never fully trusting. But in doing so, it prevented her from ever experiencing the one thing that might have healed her: genuine, consistent, unconditional safety. Marilyn Monroe didn't want fame, she wanted safety, and she searched for it in love, over and over again. In the next video, we'll explore why Marilyn Monroe kept choosing men who couldn't give her safety, and why trauma makes unsafe love feel familiar. Because once you understand that pattern, Marilyn's entire life stops looking mysterious and starts looking heartbreakingly human. If you haven't watched the Cal Neva series, start there. And if this story changed the way you see Marilyn Monroe, subscribe, because this channel isn't about myths. It's about understanding the human cost of trauma.